Steve, Nate from Direct Feed Games. 20 years ago today, a pretty major game came out, being Perfect Dark on the Nintendo 64. If you grew up during the era, if you grew up with Nintendo 64, I don't think it was possible to escape the hype of this game, because this was basically the direct successor to Goldeneye, or a spiritual successor, if you will, because they couldn't reacquire the rights to James Bond. But it allowed it allowed Rare to kind of go nuts and build off what they started with Goldeneye, and kind of offer what I would say almost was like a glimpse of the future. Like, Perfect Dark almost felt like a game from several years from that point just dropped on the Nintendo 64, to the point that the Nintendo 64 could barely run this thing. You basically had to get an expansion pack just to run Perfect Dark to any capacity. And given the fact that it's its 20-year anniversary, I wanted to get us all together, who I think we're all fans, or at least played the game, and discuss our memories of it and how well it holds up to this day. We've had a chance to revisit it over the past few years. So I guess let's start things off real quick with just our overall, I guess where we were at the time and our overall thoughts on Perfect Dark. And let's go ahead and start off with our guest here, being, again, Nate from Direct Feed Games. So Nate, what's your experience with Perfect Dark?
Perfect Dark is one of those titles that really defined my youth when it came to multiplayer games on the Nintendo 64. It was a game that I'd always have, friends come over for sleepovers or whatnot, and the first game we would play is Perfect Dark. Now, sometimes we went back to GoldenEye if one of the friends was terrible at Perfect Dark, but, we always played Perfect Dark multiplayer. Sometimes we would go through the campaign as a group, and whenever I played multiplayer, I was always Mr. Blonde.
Nice. That's the tallest one too, isn't he? So you're almost putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah, but I always like to pick the villain characters when I play a first-person shooter. So GoldenEye, I was Trevelyan. In Perfect Dark, I just kept with that tradition. So Mr. Blonde, for some reason, resonated with me. I didn't even know his role in the game yet. I just saw him in the character menu. I was like, okay, this dude looks like Wesker from Resident Evil. So he's going to be my choice here.
I wonder if you choosing the villain says anything about you in real life. Is there something we should know about you, Nate? Are you petting like a white cat at this very moment?
I might be.
All right, Steve, how about you? Where were you at when Perfect Dark came out?
So I was at the tail end of high school. It was 2000. I was 17 years old. That's terrifying. And I had a friend. His name was Dustin. We'd always hang out, and Goldeneye had been our game. Every time we'd hang out, we'd play Goldeneye as much as we could. And we had both been just waiting for Perfect Dark because, all the rumors of oh man, it's going to have high-res graphics and it's going to be this mind-blowing experience. And it honestly, for that point in time, it did not disappoint. It was one of the best-looking games I had ever played. And I remember just getting really deep into the single-player. But the most fun I had was just, when my friend would come over, I'd go to his place and we always had to bring my 64 because I was the one with the expansion pack, and his mom didn't buy him one. So we would just bring my whole 64 over to his place, steal some of his dad's beer, and play the game. And it's just, it kind of, I wouldn't say it captures my youth in a way, because I feel like those games, I more associate my youth or with Mario games or kind of Nintendo first-party franchises. But for me, it does kind of define almost like a maturing of my taste in games, where I started to kind of lean more into games that were a little more darker, a little more edgy, and Perfect Dark was kind of the game that started me going in that direction.
It's funny you say that, because Perfect Dark literally has dark in the name, and it was rated M if you're saying your tastes were maturing.
Right, and it was distributed by Nintendo, which was a really weird kind of a thing, because they weren't really too keen on being closely associated with M-rated games at the time.
Yeah, I was actually just playing the game both today and a couple days ago to refresh my memory of it, and I was surprised when the characters yelled at Joanna, and they called me the B word. I'm like, what? That's shocking to hear in a game that was on a Nintendo system. So yeah, this game really was kind of like a maturing point. It felt like for Nintendo, although it seems like they kind of regressed from that after they lost Rare and through the GameCube era. But yeah, I think you both touched on something, or quite a few things there with Perfect Dark, and that is, it had so much to it. It had so many options. Just an incredible amount of gameplay and production value went into this game. I think that's why it felt so impressive. Visually, it had major improvements from GoldenEye, including far more animation. It had these really neat lighting effects. You could even shoot out the lights to dim the environment. The AI was vastly improved. I think the enemies even work together in this game, and they even say like specific. They even vocalize in this game, which it didn't in Goldeneye at all, beyond like little yelps where they'll talk to you and each other. It's really neat. And then, of course, you could play through the campaign in single player, you could play through it in co-op, or you could play through it in counter-op, where the second player would take on the role of the enemy, which was just an amazingly forward-thinking idea. And then, of course, you had the combat simulator itself, which I couldn't even... If I went over every option, we'd be here forever. You could mix and match weapons, you could choose your spawn points, you could choose different maps, you could load up combat bots, or sibilants, I think they were called, and even give them specific personalities. This game was just jam-packed with content, and like I said earlier, it kind of felt like it dropped in from the future, which is fitting given two things. This game takes place in the future, and of course this game came out right after the turn of the century, being again in the year 2000. It was so forward-thinking, and while it's very dated in many respects, I can still go back to it and have a pretty good time. And I see like shades of brilliance there that, again, I haven't quite seen realized by too many games since then.
I revisited Perfect Dark on the Xbox 360 when they released the HD version.
Right.
But I've also revisited the N64 original, and like the multiplayer aspects still really impressed me because they gave you so many options, as you touched on, with the combat simulators. And one of the things I used to do, especially with my friends, is we would train ourselves up. So when we played against each other in multiplayer, we always wanted to get better. So we would put like insane level combat simulators against like ourselves in solo mode to see if we could defeat them. So when we would play against each other, as a group of friends, we'd be pushing ourselves to our limits, or we'd use the combat simulators to come up with new strategies to take advantage of like each map. So like one of my real like memories of playing the game was that I would hide myself in a corner, set up a laptop gun down a hall.
Oh my god.
And I would view the hall across from me, and I would usually have like the Slayer rocket launcher with myself. So I knew if someone was going to flank me, the laptop gun would get them.
Because it's a automatic turret for those who are unaware.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, the secondary mode became the turret. You could stick to a wall of ground. And the Slayer had the secondary option of a wire-controlled rocket. So you could guide it, you could give it a slight boost in momentum. And if I would see someone around the corner, I'd shoot that rocket and I would hunt them down with it. And it was just little strategies like that where you could test out so many different aspects. And the fact that every gun had a secondary option. So you had like the Super Dragon, had the assault mode, or you could have the grenade launcher. Or you could throw the gun on the ground as a decoy, and it became a proximity mine.
Right, that's so brutal.
Yeah, it was so brilliant the way they designed this game, and it still has modes in it that we don't see in first-person shooters today.
Exactly.
And that's mind-blowing when you think that 20 years has passed, and Rare had given us more options than modern-day first-person shooters when it came to multiplayer.
Yeah, they were really ahead of the curve there. And you touched on, it's so funny that you described that there's a ton of ways to play this game, which there are, but the way you played is almost identical to how I played, where I too will use laptop guns to provide cover, while I'll go hide in a corner and use a fly-by-wire, just hunt down all my prey. And I would even go to the extent of, I don't know if you recall this, if you're crouching and if you continue to hold, I think, the crouch button and C down, I think basically if you keep trying to crouch while you're crouching, it'll make your screen go black. That way screen watchers can't actually see where you're at. They can't see anything on your screen. You can't see anything either. So I would use that to launch my Slayer missiles, and people could never track me down. And then of course I eventually picked up what was called the Arena, where it was this giant cardboard contraption you put in front of your TV like on a table, and it split up the split screen display so everyone could only see their component of the screen. So it had like two mirrors, so two people sat behind the TV looking through the mirrors at their portion of the screen, and it added so much to Perfect Dark. It gave me my first taste of like what LAN gaming would become with like Halo, where everyone had their own like display and no one could see what you're doing, and really enhanced the experience for me. It wasn't necessary at all to have a good time at Perfect Dark, but I really had just a blast with that. But how about you, Steve? Did you play much multiplayer?
Yeah, well, I used to play it pretty frequently with my best friend at the time, and I mean we didn't go to those lengths. Like I didn't buy some cardboard mirror stuff. I didn't even know that existed. Yeah,
early Labo.
But well, yeah, true. Now we can all just play in Labo VR, but if you can stand the frame rate. But yeah, we played a lot, but I think for me half the fun was that we would watch each other's screens and purposely try to screw each other over. I definitely played in the sense that I think everybody loved that laptop gun. That was like probably my favorite weapon in the entire game, just because having that turret out was insanely helpful. I never quite caught on to that strategy of blacking out your screen though, but I definitely abused the controllable rockets as well. That's every game that has a weapon like that, I always gravitate to that weapon. So anytime I can chase an opponent down with a projectile is a good time. But yeah, I didn't get hardcore in depth into the strategies. This was, unfortunately for me, it was at a time where I was just getting ready to go away to college. And so I moved away not that long after the game came out. So I only had like a solid month or two with it before I moved on and, didn't have any friends. I still don't. But I thought it was just this incredibly impressive game. And so a lot of my time with the game was spent in the combat simulator, like training up against AI opponents versus playing with real people, just because once I moved to a new town, I didn't really, I wasn't really this outgoing person, so I didn't have a group of people that I could play this with anymore.
Yeah, I guess for me real quick, I was, you mentioned I think you were at the tail end of high school. I was just starting high school when Perfect Dark came out, so I had a pretty consistent friend group I was able to play with. So yeah, we got deep into Perfect Dark, and we were playing this game just religiously. Like after school, we'd race home, watch the Pokemon anime, and then play Perfect Dark, and it was so fun. Those were such great times. I have so many memories myself of just just learning these maps, playing with my friends, trying out all the different modes, whether it's like Capture the Briefcase or King of the Hill, and yeah, there were just so much content in this game. Like this was of course before DLC existed. But you didn't need DLC with Perfect Dark. It had more content than you could ever get sick of. Also, real quick, we have to talk about, how can we not talk about the Farsight? Perhaps the most OP weapon available in multiplayer of all time. This gun can not only look through walls, you can see straight through the entire stage. It didn't matter how big a stage was, you can see through the entire thing. But I didn't even realize this for the first probably several months I was playing this game. This thing has a freaking homing feature. If you just press C left or C right, it'll home in on an enemy, and it makes it pretty much impossible not to hit them. This thing is ridiculous.
Yeah, could you imagine modern day multiplayer with a gun like that? We already have like spawn campers,
right?
And now you'd have someone from across the stage in their own spawn with a Farsight, and they would just be, tracking you down. You'd be like, "Yeah, I picked up the body armor."
Dead.
Yeah, it was such an insanely overpowered weapon. I didn't know about that tracking either. I didn't realize that it had a target locator.
It's crazy.
But yeah, I remember being able to see through walls with that thing, and it was just such a ridiculous. Like it was basically Perfect Dark's version of the Golden Gun, but better.
Yeah, right.
Like you hit someone in the ankle and they're dead.
Yes, pretty much. Alright, so I think that covers the combat simulator pretty well. So let's go ahead and move on to the campaign, because this is another big part of Perfect Dark. I'm sure to varying degrees for everyone. I'm sure there's people out there who ignored, one half of the game or the other. But I think most people probably dabbled in both. And the campaign of this game is I don't know, it's interesting, because in some respects it's super impressive for reasons I've already stated. Graphically, it's amazing. It had some really cool levels. On the other, and also amazing production values for the time, like fully voiced cutscenes, fully voiced characters. On the other hand, I found it to be pretty uneven. I love how this game starts, but once you get past the initial batch of levels, I start to like it less and less and less. Especially like when we get down to like maybe a little bit past Area 51, like we get to like Pelagic 2, or where are you in Antarctica at some point or something, and you're on like Air Force One just before that. The levels it almost feels like they start feeling a little bit rushed compared to the early sequences, but maybe that's just me. So I'm curious to see what your guys' thoughts are on the campaign.
Yeah, I would agree with the rushed analysis. Like, really, once you see a lot of the Skeetar, is that what the alien species was called?
Skeetar, yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Once they were introduced, it felt like the game kind of got off rails a little bit.
Right.
But everything prior to, like, to lead to that, when you go to, like, Chicago...
Yeah.
It's, like, when you're going through the streets, it's raining, you have the lights of the city above. Like, all of it was so atmospheric, and it was magical. Even the Area 51, and I think Air Force One stages, they were fun. It's just, as soon as you started getting these biped alien velociraptor-looking creatures in the stages. Kind of like where the game became weird, not necessarily in a bad way, but the stages felt kind of rushed. They weren't as engaging as the prior levels.
Right.
Yeah, it started to feel, I mean, for lack of a better term, just cheesy after the alien.
Yeah, that's especially with like Elvis the alien. And
it's just I agree. Like I like everything up until the aliens basically show up, and then it kind of transcends from this kind of interesting spy sci-fi thriller to just like wacky crazy stuff. And
exactly.
It kind of lost me even at 17. I was like, well, this is a little weird. And so I don't know. I think it's part of I think the campaign kind of losing its steam is a big part of the reason why I haven't really gone back and played it again. Because I have fond memories of it, but I'm afraid that as like, you know, a much older person now, that those would just get destroyed. Yeah.
Well, so let me tell you, as one who has gone back on the 64, no less, but I don't have an Xbox anymore, so I wasn't even able to revisit the quasi remake. It's rough going back. Especially, so initially I was playing it in the standard definition mode, which looks horrible on most modern HD TVs. However, turning on the HD mode actually helps a lot. Apparently, from what I understand, it puts it into a format that HD TVs are better able to like upscale and display. So that looked a lot better. It actually looked pretty decent. The problem is it just tanks the frame rate, and especially on the first level, it's borderline unplayable. And that's combined with the fact that the controls are awkward to go back to, where it's not, you don't have full dual analog. There is an option for it, but even then, you have that weird ability to aim more accurately by holding R, and it's just really awkward to go back to. However, I will say that putting all that aside, once I got used to it, once I turned off HD mode to get the better frame rate, starting up the game from the beginning, I was pretty darn impressed. At least once I got past that slideshow of an opening, which runs like you can literally see each frame. But the atmosphere, as Nate was touching on earlier, is fantastic. Like you land on the roof of Datadyne, and you can see like a city. You can see an entire city around you as these flying cars are racing past. You can hear sirens in the background. You can hear cars honking. It is so amazingly atmospheric, and that continues, of course, in Chicago with the rain. It just feels great. Or just, it looks great. And of course, this game was also in surround sound too, if you had Dolby Pro Logic 2 receiver, which I did. I bought it just for this game, so I could get that quasi surround sound effect. But one more thing I want to touch on real quick before I hand over to you guys is those first 3 levels are probably my favorites in the game, or especially 1 and 3. I love how you're entering Datadyne, this skyscraper, and you're working your way down to the basement. It feels like you really are infiltrating this building and working your way into like its archives and its research center. And then in the 3rd level, after you've grabbed the thing you need, being freaking Dr. Carroll, one of those annoying companion characters of all time, where he's constantly like questioning your ability to escape with them, but then you're escaping back up through Datadyne, through that same skyscraper you just came through, but now in reverse. And it's really cool what they do here. Because for one, it starts off in darkness. You have to use your night vision goggles, and you only have about a minute or so to do so. So you're kind of obscured in darkness. You have some protection from the enemies, but you have to move quick, otherwise you're going to lose it when the lights come on. And then as you're working your way up, you encounter an attack helicopter outside, and I forgot how intense the thing is, especially because I was playing on Perfect Agent, the hardest mode in the game. Like, it is so thrilling to hear the blades of the chopper outside as it's circling the building looking for you, and you'll like be running down the hallway and see it at the end outside the window, and you have to turn around and hightail it out of there. And as you're running away, you're hearing like the glass shatter of the skyscraper as it's shooting through. It is so, like, I think that still might be one of the finest levels in any single-player first-person shooter I've played. It's just doing things, again, like I said earlier, I haven't seen too much. But then there are elements that frustrate me, like how the AI is able to shoot you almost instantly on sight, giving you no reaction time. And Perfect Agent, I don't know how I played this back as a kid, because it seems impossible these days. It's open fire immediately and you're dead. So, I don't know. Do you guys have any other like highlights you can remember from your time with the campaign, or?
Man, you literally just took mine. that skyscraper scene with the attack helicopter is like my favorite moment in the
It's
entire
so good.
game.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of sucks it peaked so early, but.
So yeah, I have to just echo what you said. It is such like an amazing moment, and I agree. Like I've played, and I think Perfect Dark is probably largely responsible for the fact that I've played a lot of first-person shooters in the ensuing years, but none of them have given me kind of that sense of tension and excitement that I got during my initial run-through of Perfect Dark.
Real quick, part of the reason for that too, I think, is the fact that there's no regenerating health. This is back when you had straight up a single health meter, and that was it. So you, like, if you get shot up early into the level, you're gonna be on the cusp of death for the entirety of the rest of it, and that does kind of ratchet up the tension, I find.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, does anyone have any other thoughts about the campaign at all beyond what we've touched on?
No, you pretty much touch on those highlights, like the highlights of the campaign. I mean, the infiltration of Datadyne, the whole introduction to that first stage, looking around, seeing the city all around that main hub center.
Right.
I mean, that was all. It was so immersive at the period, and if I remember correctly, I think you can shoot the cars that are flying.
You can.
past like the rooftops and such, right?
Yeah, you're the worst secret agent of all time. You're actively just murdering civilians during your covert mission.
Like, yeah, I'm on top of this roof. What's this guy doing? Whoops! There goes Bob.
But it's hard to target them. So again, that just adds to the detail of this game. And even to the point where, getting back to Chicago, there's an objective in that mission where you have to plant an explosive on one of the walls, and that comes into play later in the following mission where you need to detonate that same explosive. And what's really cool is, depending on where you planted it in the previous mission, that affects the opening you create in the subsequent mission, which can make that level easier or harder for you. And again, it's just like brilliant touches like those, or the fact that as you ratchet up the difficulty level, you get more and more objectives added on. So the enemies just don't get harder or smarter. You actually have more things to do. And so this was very far from like a typical like run, from like a dumb run and shooter. Like, you had to actually think and read through your like mission objectives to figure out how to complete these objectives. And again, it's something that we don't really see a whole lot of these days.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of first-person shooters now are just kind of, wipe everything in existence out and move to the next room.
Right.
Whereas Perfect Dark was definitely a lot more intelligent in its objective design. To the point that at the time when I played it, it was a little bit frustrating at first, because I'm like, okay, I'm used to Doom and Goldeneye. I got to go find a key and then open a door and kill some people, and that's it. But Perfect Dark was a little more involved, and I did appreciate that. But it feels like it's something, again, that was maybe ahead of its time, or just kind of a piece of game design that was left by the wayside.
Right.
I wish that more first-person shooters these days would be a little more complex, but I've also fallen off of the genre a bit, so I'm definitely not an expert anymore like I claimed I was some 20 years ago.
It's funny that you mentioned the word complex, considering this game had a complex level, and it was amazing. Lifted from GoldenEye, of course. All right, well, I think we're unfortunately running out of time, but do you guys have any final thoughts you want to give to our audience about Perfect Dark that we either haven't offered yet, or just a summary of your thoughts on the game?
The shooting gallery. That was one of the most fun secondary areas that I had in the main hub center, where you could just explore as Joanna. And it had the challenges. It had the multi-tier challenges. You had to get, I believe it was a 5-star rating or 3-star rating, but it had, I think it was 3 different objective tiers. So you had like the agent, perfect, and you got to explore every single weapon, and the way you could actually achieve like the gold star ratings, you could almost exploit them in some way. Like the super dragon would be, you have to get 500 points, and the way the target shifted, if you actually just threw it out and made it the grenade, you could blow up all of them, and you would easily pass the test. Or you could actually try to sit there and shoot bullseyes the whole time.
Right.
That was just a lot of fun to go into and just, spend hours testing every gun and perfecting them.
I totally forgotten about that. I'm glad you brought that up. First off, it was really cool how you could explore the whole institute as like a training situation. Yes. And then having the gun range was fantastic. And also, you touched on something there too, with how great the gunplay is in this game. Like, the guns feel great, they feel powerful, they sound amazing, the reload animations are fantastic, and the fact that in this game the enemies react to being shot appropriately. You shoot them in the leg, they're gonna grab their leg. You can shoot the guns out of their hands, then go chase down their gun and try to pick it up again. Everything felt very reactive in a way that I hadn't seen much, or in a way that we hadn't seen much of until like Resident Evil 4, I would say. How about you, Steve? Any final thoughts for us?
I think you guys have pretty much nailed it. I mean, it's a fantastic game. If you haven't played it and you like first-person shooters, you absolutely should. And even if you kind of don't, it's such an important piece of gaming history.
Yeah.
I feel like anybody who is a fan of Nintendo history should definitely check this game out, because it's kind of a pivotal moment in the N64's story.
Yeah, I mean, it came out at the tail end, but it was such a major moment. The hype leading up to this game was pretty unreal. And you mentioned something that reminded me of something else I want to touch on. You mentioned how this was a part of Nintendo history. And one of my favorite things about this game is just when it opens and you see the Nintendo 64 logo slowly morph into the Perfect Dark logo. Oh my god, it's so cool. And the sound it plays, it's like the THX sound. It's so haunting and great. And one other thing, just one other thing I want to shout out too, is its sequel, being Perfect Dark Zero on the Xbox 360, got a lot of flack at the time for being like super reflective, like every texture in the game like reflected, like you're exploring like an ancient pyramid or temple or something, and the walls are still reflective. But apparently, I forgot this. That started with this game, where at least in the first few levels, like everything's reflecting. You have the windows, you've got these metal tables that reflect, which you can also push around, by the way, which is super cool. Doors are reflective, and then there's also these lights everywhere, which have more lens flares than the freaking J.J. Abrams movie, which surprised me. But at the time, it all looked very cool, very sleek, and it kind of offered like, I feel like it kind of offered what could have been an alternate look at our future, like if Rare had not been sold and had they continued making games for Nintendo, like what else you might have seen from them. Like they were planning a sequel at one point called Velvet Dark for either the 64 or the GameCube, based on Joanna Dark's sister, and yeah, it would have been fun to see where that might have ended up. One final thing, female protagonist. Awesome. That's something we weren't seeing much of then, and it was nice that we had a lead, woman as a lead in a video game, a major, shooting game. So, well, I think that wraps up for us here. So, hey, Nate, where can people find you at?
They can find me on Twitter at DirectFeedGames. You can also find me on YouTube at DirectFeedGames. I also have a second channel called Nate the Hate, where I do discussions and podcasts. I just had a podcast go up this week where I talked with Jeffrey Grubb from VentureBeat. We talked about
the rumor guy,
the PlayStation event for June, and Nintendo's plans for 2020. So it was a good listen. A lot of interesting insight from Jeff.
And you can find a link to all that in the description below. And with that, thank you so much for joining us for our 20th anniversary discussion for Perfect Dark, which is still crazy to me that's been 20 years somehow. Hopefully you enjoyed this though, and if you haven't checked out Perfect Dark for yourself, I highly recommend doing so, at least on the Xbox. 64 is a bit hard to go back to, but the Xbox version is superior, so I would recommend checking out on that system if you are interested. So yeah, with that, thank you for watching. Click the subscribe button, ring that bell if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next time. See you guys. Bye.